This interview is part of the Living Legends collection of the Oklahoma Historical Society. It is an interview with Judge Roy Berry of Pawnee, Oklahoma, interviewed by Bernard Kellner on September 15, 1971. It is being copied for inclusion in the permanent collection of the Oral History Program on April 18, 1990 by Joel Todd.
Pawnee, Oklahoma, 15 September 1971. This is Bernard A. Kellner, Oklahoma City, here on behalf of Oklahoma City College, Oklahoma City Christian College, Living Legends of History. Interviewing George Roy Berry of Pawnee. It is a pleasure to present Roy because he saw much life and has lived here practically all his life in Pawnee. He's being born in '89. Mr. Berry.
Thank you. I was born in Liscum, Texas in '89. When the strip opened, I was a baby, and I was carried as a baby when they made the run into Oklahoma. My father's first homestead was the original town of Guthrie now. About 81 years ago, my father moved 3.5 miles south of town, where he started a big cattle ranch. And in those days, to get cattle, they had to get them up. Him and his cowboys would go down to Creek Nation and the surrounding territory, and they'd be gone weeks at a time sometimes, and then they'd bring the herds in. I remember the youngsters saying when the herds come in, there'd be oxen with yokes on. In those days, where they'd take the yokes off, and they'd put some of them in the feedlots where they fed the cattle, and hogs followed these cattle, and when the hogs got ready for market, my father would put them in a lumber wagon, and they'd haul to Perry and sold for 3 cents a pound. We lived in a log house, and about 3 blocks west of us was Setting Bull, and all that land in those days was Indian land. My father had it leased. And then there's a great big large mud lodge a few blocks from us where the Indians used to gather for the dances. The Indians didn't stay in one spot all the time in those days. They'd have a camp at one place, and then they'd move at another. And you wonder why they lived. In those days, there's lots of game. In other words, wild turkey and deer and prairie chickens, nothing to see them. My father tells about one time, to give you an idea how thick they were, that he roped one. And another time I remember during a storm, the prairie chickens hit the side of the house, and us kids went up and picked the chickens up. So it gives you an idea how thick it was and how the Indians lived. And in the early days before statehood, my father and his brother Andrew and Will and I run a trading post a few blocks west of where the Pawnee Indian Hospital is now. Of course, there was a log shed, and they had a blanket they used for a cash register, and most of those days, all money was gold and silver, and they'd throw it out on the blanket, and then when they got more money they'd use, they'd take it to our Kansas City and put it in the bank. Of course, some of you might wonder how the Indians got the money and how the trade was. Those days, they had annuity. Every 3 months, the Indians got so much money. In other words, when this land was leased, it was put in one fund on an annuity fund, then, of course, the government give them money in those days. I've heard my father say many a time that he never had the Indian beat him out of anything in the early days. Their word was just as good as gold. And he had a little book, he'd mark it down, and every annuity, these Indians would come and pay off. He said that the Indians wasn't crooks, the crooked white people come in, and those were the ones that made crooks out of the Indians. So it's interesting to know that you can't realize how honest they were in those days. Of course, They dressed in the Indian. Most everything was in blankets. Even the bucks, they called the men bucks, had the shawls, and they carried the babies on their backs. One thing I always remember is that I never heard of an Indian baby cry.
Tell it again about the trading post. I think that, I don't know, I think so.
1, 2. I told about the trading post.
Yeah, you did, but I don't know that we got down there. Tell it again.
Well, in the early days, about 2 or 3 blocks west of where the Pawnee Indian Hospital is now, my father and his brothers, Will, Ike, and Andrew, had a trading post. And of course, they was sort of a construction built out of logs, and their cash register was a saddle blanket. And in those days, most all money was silver and gold. And they'd put that, the father put that money on a blanket, and when they got more money than they wanted, why, they took it to Arkansas City by spring wagon and put it in the bank. And of course, you often wonder where the Indians got the money. Well, in those days, they had every 3 months they paid them. They got an Indian annuity besides the money that the government given them. And one thing about it, my father used to always say that there never was a crooked Indian in those days. They were just as good as gold. And if they promised you so much, why, they'd pay you, and they got their annuity. He said that the white people come in here, and the crooked white people made crooks out of the Indians. Before that, they never had any trouble with them. And transportation in those days, of course, was brought in here by wagons and horseback, and I think, of course, the closest railroad was at Perry, and they'd haul the stuff in here by the wagon loads and leave it in the grocery store for the trading. And that's...
Okay, now, that's right. Yeah, okay. Okay.
The first bank established here was established in 1893. My father with a fellow named Thompson and Sam Mary, I don't remember who the other was, established the first bank. One thing to tell on my father, he said when he first started the bank, it's kind of under, if I remember, some kind of a frame building. And a fellow come in and said one of his best friends come in, made a deposit with him, said he had so much confidence in his own bank, he put in $10 himself. And as far as I remember, that's the oldest bank in the country today, in this county. And I don't know what else. Told about that, didn't I? Indian school?
We didn't get it recorded. Okay.
Right about the time of before statehood, the government established the Indian agency here, where all the Indians went in to gather their annuities and do their business, and the government built up an Indian school where all the Indian children could come in and go to school. The interesting thing to remember there that one of the teachers in the early days was Pawnee Bill. He was a teacher there when he was around 16 or 17 years old. And today that Indian school is still there, but it's put into a Samaritan rest home, as Indians all go to the public schools, and now we have no trouble with children, the colored, the Indians, and they all go to the same schools, and there never has been any race or trouble issue in regard to the races. Father, my father, he was the son of 13 children. and he comes from Barbertsville, Kentucky, and at that time they eventually all landed in Oklahoma but one. There's one daughter, one sister that never did leave Kentucky, and this sister's father lived to be 101 years old, and so I think that's remarkable. Another thing I'd like to mention, when we lived out south of town, there's 9 in our family, and when the family started growing, my mother persuaded my father to come to town and rent a house so us kids could go to school in the wintertime. And they used to tell on Dad. Dad said he had moved to town, and that every time he had addition to the family, he built on the room, and said he got the alley and had to stop. And so that was the end of our family, 9 of our family. And as far as myself in the bank in early days, of course, this is past the statehood days. On regard my own life, I graduated in 1909 at Pawnee High School, and I belonged to a football team in 1906, and baseball in 1907, and the basketball team in 1907. And today, I'm the only one living of that generation. So, and in my graduating class, Thurman Hurst, ex-court judge, we're the only 2 living. As far as my own life is concerned, in about 1920-something, I went out to working I worked on the eggs for oil companies, the Sinclair, El Paso, Natural, and a lot of the big oil. For 25 years, I worked for these oil companies, paying their claims and right-of-ways through different places. I've worked in 25 states, so out of working in all the 25 states, personally, I like the Carolinas and West Virginia, the people. But when it comes down to oil, I've never found a place that you can beat the people in Oklahoma. It's just something that brings you closer together, and it makes you enjoy your own state. And in other words, a lot of these when I worked for these oil companies, especially in the East, you never dealt with a dealer. You had to deal with a lawyer. And you can see how much trouble you had to make in settlements. You'd been 2-3 trips before you see this lawyer and finally get to your client. Well, in Oklahoma, and of course a lot of these western states, all you do, you deal with a landowner. But after all those travels and country I've covered, the people I haven't seen in Oklahoma haven't seen the best part of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. It's been very interesting listening to your reminiscing, and I'm sure it'll be of value to the oncoming generations, and particularly the people in Pawnee when they have an opportunity to review these legends of history. Signing off, 30.